So it is my pleasure to present Professor Janelle Jenstad, who is here to give a lecture on building a digital gazetteer for Shakespeare's London. Janelle Jenstad is Associate Professor at the University of Victoria. She directs the Map of Early Modern London project, which is a SSHRC-funded project that maps the streets, sites, and significant boundaries of late 16th century and early 17th century London. MoEML? Am I pronouncing it right? MoEML?
A student neologism.
Is, or the Map of Early Modern London is, producing a georeferenced critical edition of the Agas map, an encyclopedia of early modern London, an XML library of literary texts, and a versioned edition of Stow's 1598, 1603, 1618, and 1633 survey of London. She is Associate Coordinating Editor of the Internet Shakespeare editions, and she is editing the Merchant of Venice for the ISE. And with Jennifer Roberts-Smith, she is co-editing a volume entitled Shakespeare's Language in Digital Media, which is coming out very soon from Ashgate. So please welcome Professor Janelle Jenstad.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to be here. Your weather is very much colder than the weather I left behind. I wasn't expecting that. I'm going to give you an overview of the project. I know that a number of people here are studying digital humanities, so our project is a bit of a test case for what can happen to a project that goes on and on and on. And then I want to move into a description of the 4 interoperable projects. I'm going to focus on the map and on the gazetteer that we've built by surprise, actually. So I'll tell you more about that when we get there. And if we have time, I'll give you a demo of the new map that we just launched in beta. It's a kind of fun teaching tool. So I'll show you what we have attempted to do, and you can give me some feedback. So, first of all, began with a map. I was telling some of the students about this over lunch. I saw a map on a wall and thought, that's cool, I want to do something with it. The map is Civitas Londinum. It's been attributed to Ralph Agas, who was a surveyor who would have been about 18 years old at the time this map was produced. He is therefore not very likely to have been the surveyor. The attribution comes from the back of an 18th century map of Oxford, which says that Ralph Agas drew a map of London. And so people put, sort of 2 and 3 together and got 9. The map represents London as it looked around 1561, but the only copies that survive come from 1633. And the copy that we're working with comes from the London Metropolitan Archives, formerly the Guildhall Library, which is where I saw it hanging on the wall while I was working in the manuscript reading room. You need to get up and stretch every once in a while when you're transcribing Elizabethan secretary, and so I would go look at this map. And over time, it became a web of possibilities that allow us to ask and answer many different research questions about space and place in early modern London. The spatial turn hadn't quite happened yet in our discipline, but we built the tool that actually allows people to address the questions that have emerged from that shift in our discipline. So I wanted to say a few things about the project. First of all, we're a TEI project. That's important for those of you who are in Jen's class. You're working on TEI right now, and TEI has become the industry standard for encoding literary text. It stands for Text Encoding Initiative. We're formally a text creation partnership project because we worked with the Text Creation Partnership in Oxford to take their transcriptions of John Stow's Survey of London, transform them, and then start correcting them and editing them ourselves. We have, we're kind of an ideological project in that we decided right from the beginning that we wanted to be open access. We did not want to be locked behind a subscription paywall. Adam Matthew tried to buy us at one point, and we said no. For various reasons, but the most important one is that lots of people have contributed to the project on the understanding that it would always be open access. It's also open code. Every page has a button on the side that allows you to look at the page in TEI, the original TEI that we encoded it in, and the various XML outputs that we transform it into. And it's all licensed by Creative Commons license, which means anybody can take any of our texts and do anything with them. And occasionally they do. It's kind of interesting to see what people do with the tagged text once it becomes available to them. So I wanted to say a little bit about the history of the project because it's a cautionary tale in some ways, but it's also a little history of DH at the same time. In 1999, we built this thing in HTML. We didn't have scanners big enough for a map that was 6 feet 2 inches long and 2.5 feet wide, so we scanned it at a military facility. Now you can go down to your local copy shop and have a map like that scanned for about $10, I think. And we encoded the whole thing in HTML, and we used a proprietary program called UVic, which no longer exists and couldn't possibly be supported anymore anyway. So then we rebuilt it again in 2001 and made it look a little nicer, a little more professional, a little more expandable. We added frames, which were very popular then, drop caps, which were also very popular then. And we worked on it for a little while, and then I realized it was unmanageable. It was becoming huge, and the whole thing was encoded in HTML, and every time we added a new page, I had to go and create 200 links to that page manually. So I said, forget it. I'm not going to spend my life on this. And I let it go. 2006, I was at the University of Windsor. There was a little bit of money left in the TAPOR grant, Text Analysis Portal for Research, and I got the dregs of it. Got a couple $1,000 to pay a programmer to convert the whole project into XML, Sensible Markup Language, and TEI, which was then in the P4 edition. And that's when we launched it live on the internet. It wasn't just an intranet teaching tool anymore. It was just quietly put on the web, and people started noticing it. In 2011, we re-encoded the whole thing, so it was now compliant with TEI P5. I'm lucky enough to work with a programmer who's on the TEI Technical Council and happens to write the documentation for TEI. He's very ideologically driven, and he often persuades me to do things a certain way. He's got these mantras like, tell the truth. You cannot hack your encoding. You have to tell the truth about the text, and we'll worry about rendering it later. So I'm on board with that now. Always do what your programmer says. In 2013, we launched this look on the right here. We added historical GIS, GIS coordinates, and just in January, we launched our Open Layers 3.0 map. So the cautionary tale here is that this is actually version 2 of the map. Version 1 of the map is lost. I wrote over it. It never occurred to me that I might actually want to keep that. So edition 1 of the project is gone. We now version everything in a subversion repository, so we can roll any page back to any previous version, and that's now considered to be good practice in DH. It's so easy to correct stuff on the web that you forget about the need to keep it and archive it, particularly when lots of other people are involved. So what it is now is 4 projects in one. They're all using slightly different technologies to achieve what they achieve, but they have a core set of shared technologies that make them interoperable. And linked data and interoperability is the next big thing that's happening in DH. So we're starting to experiment with extending our own linking practices into other projects. And this is where good, traditional, hardcore scholarly values come into play. Consistency, bibliography, getting the data right, depositing it in one place because it's going to proliferate across the web and it has to be right in its form to which all the other projects link to. So it's kind of interesting that this whole project has come full circle back to very traditional scholarly values. As the technology has sorted itself out and become simpler to use, more robust, more widespread, more accessible by everybody, we can in some ways get back to doing the kind of work we were doing on a bigger scale than ever, because now we've got so many things digitized. We've got so many texts. EBO TCP released 25,000 texts into the public domain on January 1st, 2015. More are coming. Libraries are digitizing their rare books. Repositories are digitizing their manuscripts. Paleography is probably going to be the next big thing. I work on print books, though, mostly. So the map. I wanted to say some things about the map because it's really transformed in our project into a very different sort of object than I imagined. Initially, I thought it was a nice way to visualize literature and literary phenomenon, like where the theaters were in relation to the city, how Shakespeare might have walked through the city, where Shakespeare picked up his mail, for example, at an inn, the Bell Inn. So how did he get from his house in Silver Street to the Bell Inn? That's the sort of thing I was thinking about. But I've started thinking about it in really different ways as a textual object that needs to be edited. So here's a little bit of history of the map. It's in one form, it still looks like this, a little star map, a tile like that. But this is what it looks like now in January of this year. You can see the whole thing at once. We actually launched an experimental map like this in 2006, a month before Google Maps was launched. It launched a layered map. Google, of course, has trillions of dollars, so they've done amazing things, and our map kind of stayed stuck where it was. But the real reason that I didn't pursue that map was that it was a full span of the map put together exactly the way I put the map together on my kitchen floor using sellotape in 1997. And I had paid no attention to things like the fact that it was a photocopy of a map, that there was material missing along the seams of the map, because it was printed on 8 wooden blocks, and by 1633, the blocks were worn on the edges and information was missing. So I tried to mash it together as best I could, but I never intended for anybody to see it like this. So when we stitched it together in 2006, the programmers were trying to save the data we'd already plotted on the map. And I said, no, this is our chance to put it together right. We really need to put it together properly if we're going to do this. Nope, it would take too much time to re-plot all the data. So we kept that old map, and of course, as time has passed, we recognized the need to do a better version of the map. And part of it has emerged from my sense that this is actually a text. So there's the map in full. It's got lots of interesting things. It's not really the best map for a historical project. Let me say a few words about why. It's not georeferenceable at all. Most historical GIS projects don't actually work with historical maps. They'll take a modern Google map and they'll plot their data on it because what they're really interested in is the spatial relation to each other, not actually what the space looked like. And, or they'll take an ordnance survey map. Ordnance survey maps are developed in the 19th century, or they'll take the historical map that is most georeferenceable and georectifiable. So our sister project, Locating London's Past, plots 16th, 17th, 18th, and 19th century data on an 18th century map, the Roke map, which you can georeference and georectify. It distorts a little bit, but it's still pretty good. And now they're working backwards to the Morgan Large Map of London from 1676, after the Great Fire of London in 1666, and they'll do the same thing with that. They'll georeference and georectify it. You can't georeference and georectify Agas for reasons I'll explain in a minute. Still, it's a really interesting cultural document, and it's full of information. It's terrific to show undergraduate students because it gives them a sense of what London was actually like. So this is Cheapside Street, which is the main processional route in London, also the main shopping street, and it's one of the 3 places that shows up in the title of the play, A Chase Made in Cheapside, which is kind of an oxymoron when you realize that this is the main market street and everything's for sale in Cheapside. So there is the cross, there's the standard, there's the great conduit, and there's the little conduit. And what you see here, with my slide changer, it's in my hand. Those are water cannons. It's evidence of human activity. In the morning, the apprentices in the shops went to the conduits to get water for the household to drink and cook with during the day. It was the only place in London where people were allowed to gather in groups of more than 3, so this is the place where information was shared. Obviously, people could gather at church and at the playhouse, but they couldn't actually form into unofficial groups on the streets without getting into trouble. There are no people inside the walls of the city. It's a map that depicts the urbs, the buildings, the built environment. But outside the city, you get lots of evidence of human activity. This person with the 2 donkeys who appears to be floating on the water is filling up leather water bags for it would be non-potable water, but it would be used for washing and things like that. Here's a sculler taking people back and forth across the river. That's the main way that people got across the river in this period. And this I really like. women are laying out laundry to sun bleach in Moorfield, and up here, there's a child and a mother running towards each other. So there's a tender moment in the middle of this map that's mostly about buildings. So some of the challenges that we've had with this map. There are 3 witnesses to the map. One of them is at the London Metropolitan Archives, and that's the one that's been widely reproduced. They're very generous with their materials, and it's quite accessible. It's been scanned a couple of times, most recently for us in 2013. This, however, is the National Archives copy down at Kew, and it's in 1,000 fragments. So nobody's ever done anything with it. But my postdoc went and photographed every inch of it, wondering if there was any additional information there. And sure enough, there is additional information that we need to take account of in our edition. There's information along those seams that's missing in the London Metropolitan Archives copy. But we can capture it from here and then transfer it back into our map. Very difficult to work with, though, as I'm sure you can imagine. The other witness was at the Pepys Library in Cambridge. It was bound in sheets in a book until the 19th century, and then it was literally glued together and put under glass. They keep it in the closet. They don't like to get it out. They don't want to take the glass off it. They don't want it photographed. So we have never been able to do anything with it other than look at it and suffer the complaints. So, you know, sometimes what you can do in your edition is very much dependent on the institutions that hold the materials. Second, there are surveying errors in this map. It is not a transparent interface to London. It's a text, and it's got mistakes in it. This is a church, and it is in the wrong place. Oops. It's St. Martin Orgar, and it should be up here. So how do we edit that? You know, if you think in a play that a stage direction is wrong or speech prefix is wrong, you can correct it. And we have mechanisms for correcting it and mechanisms for recording our correction. But it's very difficult with an object like this to actually move the church. We can talk about it, we can write about it, but we can't actually move it because we haven't figured out how to do that yet. And we wonder if we would even want to. So to what extent can we make textual emendations? We have made some conjectural emendations. This is the Smithfield stitch, and I'll show you what it's supposed to look like first. The street should come around like this in a U, but on the original map, where it comes in a U right here, there's material missing. So we wrestled for a while with what we should do there, and then we looked at Thomas Tanzell's editing without a copy text. And we thought, this is a work for which there is no copy text. So we have a right to do stuff with it. If we treat it as a text, then we can apply all of the methodologies of textual criticism. There is an 18th century witness to the 16th century version of the map. It was marketed in the 18th century as an original. It was actually a fraud. But it's a really interesting witness to my mind. It's an imperfect witness to a lost 16th century original. And we were able to take that map, hire a graphic artist and say, can you draw the information that's on this map in the style of that map in such a way that we can interpolate it into our map? And working with her was so interesting because she thinks about these objects in a way differently than I do. She was thinking about the pressure of the carving tool in the wood and how the first insertion of the knife into the wood goes deeper than the line that goes this way, and then when the knife comes out of the wood at the end of the line, it's on an angle, and so this part takes more ink and that part takes less ink. So she had to experiment with pens to see if she could do that. So this part here is actually drawn by Gillian Player on the basis of a mountain of historical evidence that we gave her. So we're confident that it's right, but it's not the original text. It's very much an ideal text constructed by us. Now the problem of georectification. When you georectify a map, what you do is you identify the latitude and longitude coordinates on the map, and then you stretch it and squish it to fit on an actual globe. You can do this with one part of this map, the plat or plan part of the map, which you're almost looking right down at the central part of London. There's no vanishing point. There's no difference in the size of the buildings from the front of that part to the back of that part. However, this part of the map is a bird's eye view, as a bird would see it if it were flying in at about 75 degrees. And that part of the map is a perspective landscape. And nobody has ever tried or even suggested that we should be georectifying perspective landscapes. So I did try to georectify the Plaid, and we loaded it up in Google Earth, and it looked okay, but it distorts the map just enough that you lose that pleasure of the buildings and the woman and the child running towards each other and the scullers going across the Thames. So it seemed to me that that was a loss too great for this map. We didn't want to do that. So what we did then is we took our ideal map and we opened it up in open layers, and we built an open layers platform for it. Open layers is nice because you can stack maps. You're used to working with this because you work with Google Maps all the time, which is open layers is replicating that in an open code kind of environment. So the layer contains the witnesses that we started with. Eventually it'll include that map that's in 1,000 tiny fragments. It'll include our ideal text, the DIY layers that I'm going to show you if we have time, build your own map. Contributors layers, we're actually inviting people to annotate the map in particular ways and contribute them. It'll be integrated with Google Maps, other historical maps, and we hope it'll be interoperable with other mapping projects like the Grub Street project at the University of Saskatchewan and the London Mapping Project and locating London's past in the UK. Easy to do because GIS coordinates act like a pin. You can pin lots of maps together with a GIS coordinate. Okay, so I'm going to move really rapidly through the encyclopedia in the library in Stow, and then we can talk about the Gazetteer. So the encyclopedia has lots of things in it. This was initially what I was trying to do with my students. It's one thing to have a map, but they also needed information about early modern London. And so we had what we're now calling a placeography, the Gazetteer, a personography, an orgography of organization, topics, a glossary, and a bibliography. And the placeography includes lots of different categories. We add new ones from time to time. We're about to add liberties. So the map's not great, or our map isn't great at showing the less salubrious parts of London, but people often write about those parts of London, so we need to have them in our environment, even if they're not actually on our map. So bookshops, bridges, churches, gates, halls, markets, neighborhoods. We've got someone working with the ESTC to pull data out of the ESTC and geolocate it. It's really difficult to do because people have never been interested in this before. So all of the geographical information is located in the imprint along with the publisher's name. It didn't occur to the makers of the ESTC that those three pieces of data might need three separate metadata fields. So they're all squished together in one metadata field, and you have to peel them apart and then start doing things with them. Okay, so geocoordinates. The way that our encyclopedia works, the placeography, is we have one file for every place in London. And we have two kinds of geospatial coordinates in each of those files. One is the traditional geocoordinates. And just to parse it, this is TEI. So we're saying, here's the location of this place, and the geotags they use are the geocoordinates. And they're simple latitude and longitude for a point. If it were a line or a polygon, it would look considerably more complex. That's embedded right in the file. We don't try to attach it to the map. It's in the file. We're saying this place was here. And it will always be here, no matter which map we try to plot it on. And we can also give the source. There's a wonderful project in the UK, spearheaded by Gabriel Egan, to geolocate all of the playhouses and then create walking tours so that tourists can walk from one playhouse to another. And they gave us permission to use their geocoordinates. Anyone who's worked with historical GIS will appreciate the difficulty of actually figuring out where things were. So in true scholarly format, I borrowed somebody else's data, given them full credit, which also means I don't have to take responsibility if it's wrong. But we're working with them, so new data keeps coming to light. There are new archaeological digs going on in London all the time. They just found a curtain 2 years ago. We've known about the roads for a long time. Who knows what we're going to find next? And then this kind of data can be updated on their site and on our site simultaneously. But I'm not an archaeologist, and it takes years and millions of dollars to get those 2 points. So once they're there, I want to take advantage of them. We also built a custom tool. There's no documentation for it, and if you Google it, you won't find it, but I'll leave you with the link because it's really useful, and it works for anything, not just early modern London. You can load up Google Maps in our Vertexer tool, draw a shape on it, and it will, as you draw, it will put the coordinates here, and then you can just grab them, copy and paste them, and put them into any document you want. TEI, XML, Google Maps, whatever. But that says, these are the coordinates of the thing that you drew on the map. Point, line, or polygon. Okay, other sources. We've taken shapefiles from other projects. Locating London's Past shared all of their street location coordinates and their parish boundaries with us. And that's incredibly generous of them and saves us from thousands of hours of work. We also rely a lot on archaeological data. What are the GIS coordinates of the cornerstone of the Guildhall Chapel? Well, you go to the London Archaeological Record Catalogue and they georeference all their finds. So when they find the cornerstone, they actually record it in their database with geocoordinates. So then we can take those and put them in our project, and then we can put it to our map. So if you go to anything in the encyclopedia, you can look at it on Google Maps, and you can also look at it on our own map. I didn't do a screen grab of that. So now we're moving towards the Gazetteer. The library is really crucial in helping us build the Gazetteer, for reasons that will become clear. The kinds of things that we like to encode our texts have lots of place names in them. I have a particular scholarly interest in texts where buildings speak. And so this is the doleful lamentation of Cheapside Cross, which is sitting in the middle of Cheapside Street there. And, it's a daily reminder, a daily offensive reminder to many people of the Catholic history of London. And so these figures here of saints, and Mary is in there somewhere holding the baby Jesus, were disfigured on a regular basis. Baby Jesus is literally cut out of the arms of the Virgin Mary and smashed, and then it gets put back secretly by a Catholic sympathizer and then smashed again. Not because these people weren't Christians, but because they believed you shouldn't represent anything, any iconography. So Cheapside Cross puts out a bunch of pamphlets. We don't actually know who wrote them, but there's a little flurry of pamphlets written in the voice of Cheapside Cross, which is lamenting this physical damage to its structure and mourning the past, and you get a sense of the religious sympathies of the people who were writing these pamphlets back and forth. It's like the Martin Marprelate tract, but in the voice of Cheapside Cross, lamenting its current broken status. So we've edited that, and you can see it on the site. I have a particular fondness for diplomatic transcriptions and long S's, so we've retained all those. Although, if they're there, you can convert them with a click of a button to a normal S. But if you convert them to normal S, you can't convert them back to long S very easily. So you always encode more than you think people are going to want, and you can display it in a simpler way. But it's really hard to upcode something. So code to the highest degree you can, and then down style it in your rendering. But you'll never be able to upcode something once you've downcoded it. So things like goldsmiths' shops, we tag. So if you want to read something about the Worshipful Company of Goldsmiths, you can look at that. That's in our orthography. And you can also look at the page images on Evo if you have a subscription. Knowing that a lot of people don't have subscriptions, we're trying to go with open access resources as much as possible. So for our edition of Stow, we've actually bought the 1598, 1603, 1618, and 1633 Stows. Fortunately, a folio by John Stow is not nearly as expensive as a folio by Shakespeare. I picked it up on eBay for $633. Provided the library digitized it and repaired it, which they did at a great expense, more than actually spent on the book. Mayoral shows. We're doing all of the mayoral shows. They've been most of them have been edited before, but they've always been edited by author and collected by author. I'm actually really interested in taking them apart and showing them by place. So what would happen if you stood in Cheapside year after year after year? You'd see a little slice of each one of the pageants as it went by you. They were parades that told a story. And they tend to be like the court mass. The first half of the story is about how corrupt London is and how mayors are subject to all this temptation and avarice and bribes. And the second half of these pageants tends to resolve, London is wonderful, of course our Lord Mayor isn't going to take bribes. So I have this pet theory that if you lived on the first half of the route, you would have this view of London as this very corrupt place, and mayors as these people who are particularly susceptible to temptation. And if you lived on the latter half of the route, or habitually stood on the latter half of the route, because people did stake out their spot, you would have a really different view of London. But I don't think we can entirely get at that until we're willing to put all of the pageants into one environment and then slice them not by a single pageant in a year, but by place of performance over a whole period of years. So it's the ultimate hypertextual stack, if you like. This one I really like. That's my photograph of the page. Somebody's written champion for the city, or the city's champion. I don't know who that guy was, but he's clearly imagining his subjectivity in a really interesting way. It makes me think of the Shoemaker's Holiday, where all the apprentices sort of fantasize that they too can become Lord Mayor. They're willing to work because this dream is always held out in front of them. And this is what it looks like on Evo. Terrible. That's what it looks like in our edition. We'll talk tomorrow in class about how you can use CSS styling to do descriptive bibliography. Prescriptive tagging hasn't gone away. We just now use it for descriptive bibliography. Okay, and then Stow's survey. This is a text I absolutely adore. Most people don't know much about it. John Stow is a really cranky guy in his 70s who was lamenting the way London was changing around him. The population had doubled in his lifetime. His father's land had been expropriated by Cromwell. You know, he was bitter, but he was also an antiquarian and a very good finder of information. So he wrote this survey of London in 1598. Little quarto volume, black letter Gothic, full of mistakes. It caught the imagination, a description of our city. So the second edition came out in 1603. Stow died in 1605, so he didn't get to see what has become of his text. It was put out in a much longer edition in 1618, edited by his friend Anthony Munday, who was also a writer of pageants. And in 1633, it came out in this tremendous folio volume, which I'll show you in a minute. So we are going to edit all four of them, because they're really very interesting texts, and they need to be considered together. We've just about finished 1598. We've tagged all the places, all the dates, and all the people in it, and we've added about 25,000 names to our general knowledge of the number of people who lived in London. So I don't think anybody's thought to pull those names out of Stow before. And for many of them, that's all we know about them, that they lived and died in a particular parish. So this is the, these are the Folgers copies of the Stow. That's not the screen.
I think it's the one on the other side of the door.
There you go.
There was no half and half, though. It's the whole thing or nothing.
I did this because somebody at some point, I can't even remember which scholar it was, said that the 1618 was published in folio. No. There's 1598. 1599, it's the same sheets as 1598, but it was reissued with a new title page. So that's 1599. 1603 in a lint vellum binding, 1618, and then 1633. And then here they are from the side. You can see how it gets longer every time. And the folio volume, it's twice as big this way as the 1618 quarto, but it's the same thickness, so it's basically got twice as much stuff. So the way that the author put it together was through a method that I think of as interstitial accretion. So 1603 retains all of the text of 1598, but then it adds stuff. And it doesn't just do it at the end, it does it throughout the volume. So by the time you get to 1633, the part that's describing Cheapside will have the 1598 text about Cheapside, then the 1603 text about Cheapside, then the 1618. Here's what's happened since then. This building was torn down, that person died, these buildings were expropriated. And then 1633, this is what happened to the place. So if you're seriously interested, about the history of London, the archaeology, the buildings, the people, how it changed in a period when the population went from 50,000 in 1550 to 400,000 in 1650. This book will tell you, and how you figure out how a place changed, other than sitting down and reading all 4 volumes yourself, is you come to a versioned edition that can show you how the text changed from one edition to the next. Don't hold your breath. It's going to take about 5 years. Now, Stow is full of place names. He's really recording how people have changed the way they talk about their city. So here we have Stinking Lane. Then is Stinking Lane, or Chick Lane so-called, or Chick Lane at the east end of the Greyfriars Church, and then the late dissolved Church of the Greyfriars. The original whereof was this. Okay. So those of you who are medievalists will recognize the technique here, apposition. Stow is all about apposition, apposing multiple names for a place. And that's what gave us the idea to do a gazetteer. Because this text is so unbelievably rich. So there's just a little bit of the Black Letter Gothic 1598 text. You can see the names of people. And you click on them, you'll get a pop-up window like that. And then you'll get New Church of the Greyfriars, which will take you to this page, Greyfriars Church. And there you have a date. I could talk to you for a couple hours about Julian and Gregorian calendars. It's really interesting. And I just found out, I'm going to take a minute and tell you this. I just found out last week that Queen Elizabeth actually had a proclamation ready to go. England was going to adopt the Gregorian calendar, and then the English bishops came down on her government hard and said the London bishops, or Pope Gregory, is the Antichrist. And if you adopt his calendar, we are all going to hell. So that was the end of the Gregorian calendar until 1752 in England, causing all kinds of problems for historians. All right, so there's our edition of Stow, obviously a little bit easier to read, full of markup. All right, so now we get to the MoEML Gazetteer. We've got a map that's got really interesting place names on it that we've identified. We've got an encyclopedia full of information and names. We've got a library full of texts that have an incredibly rich array of variants for all of these places, particularly in Stow, which, because it's a positive in form, will give us multiple spellings and multiple variant forms right in one sentence. My programmer said to me one day, you know, we're building a gazetteer. And I said, we are? He said, yeah. You know, a gazetteer has got place names, variant place names, and geographic information. We've got it all there. I said, could we actually build a gazetteer from what we're doing? He said, yes. So we spent a week. We pulled all of this information out of the tagging we'd already been doing for 5 or 6 years, and in a week, we generated a gazetteer. The lesson, the take-home lesson for those of you in the DH class is that you cannot always predict how your data will be used when you start a project. You can't even predict how you yourself might use it. But all the time we'd spent tagging these editions and working with this map, because I am a textual scholar at heart, turned out to generate the single most useful tool we've ever made. And that's the tool that the historians want. That's the tool that anybody else who's trying to connect to our project wants. That's the tool that people who are trying to identify toponyms in the entire corpus of Igbo TCP texts want. They're trying to do natural language processing on a corpus of 26,000 texts. They don't know that Stinking Lane and Chick Lane are the same place. NLP won't do that for you, but a gazetteer will. So here's how we did it. What is a gazetteer, first of all? Basic definition of a gazetteer, you've all seen them. The index at the back of a map is the simplest kind of gazetteer. It has to have an authority name. It also has to have variant names, which we call toponyms in our project. So what other names can you give a place? Did Tuscaloosa ever have another name?
They're variant spellings.
Okay, lots of variant spellings. We think about New York. It used to be New Amsterdam. So you'd want to record those kinds of name changes. What type of place is it? And some kind of spatial reference. either a reference to a map grid or GIS coordinates. That's what a gazetteer is. So we had to pull all of that information out of all of this tagging that we've done. Why we need one, why it was worth doing, is that there are no historical gazetteers of cities. It's been a huge headache for us. This is why we need to work with other projects, why we need to go to archaeological data, because you can't just go to GeoNames and get the geo-coordinates for Bow Lane or Pissing Alley. They don't exist. All the historical gazetteers are operating at a much higher organizational level. So you'll get countries, counties, provinces, parishes, towns, parishes, but what you won't get are streets. Okay? I did take a GIS course a number of years ago at DHSI, and the teacher and I spent the week trying to figure out why we couldn't understand each other, and finally I realized that what he was talking about was towns, and what I was talking about was street corners. So I couldn't just go to Google Maps and get the coordinates of the middle of the town. I had to do all of this extra work. So our gazetteer, because it's so much more granular than any other gazetteer, actually enables people to work at the level of the street and the street corner. Plus the spatial turn in literary studies. There are dozens and dozens of books coming out right now about space and place and location, and we're thinking about how people move through our spaces now and how people would have moved through their spaces in the past and what that meant for the literature they produced and how they understood their communities and who they would have known and what they would have passed on the way to this or that. You can only do that when you have maps and when you can identify place names accurately. Okay, so here's what it looks like on the site. We have the toponym variant there, the authority name, our XML ID, which is just an alphanumeric string. We have the Agas map coordinate, which is now going to take you to our experimental map. And we've got all these variants. And then what type it is. Okay, so where the heck did all this stuff come from? That's what we'll do next. How we populated our gazetteer. If you tag it, you can mine it. So the authority name, well, we had a file for every single location in our project. And because it was tagged in TEI, and there's a TEI element for title, and we'd had to go through this process of deciding what the name should be, given a range of options, we had really already decided what the authority name of the place should be. So the authority name in the gazetteer is taken directly from each one of those files. Whatever appears in the title element is the authority name for the place. We have actually gone back and edited quite a few of the authority names. Now that we've built the gazetteer, it allows us to view our own data in a different way, and we've used it as a check. Do we agree with ourselves? Sometimes we don't. Where do the variants come from? All of those library texts that we've been tagging up. We made a decision early on. Jen, you'll appreciate this. Right? Most TEI texts would tag place names. They would tag place. We decided that those were not places. They were actually toponyms. They were referring strings. So every place name, every toponym is treated as a string of characters that points to something else. And I'm so glad now we made that decision because it allowed us to build the gazetteer. So every one of these is a referring string. It has a target. You'll know that even if you only ever worked in HTML. And there's the unique mole ID. And notice that it's the same all the way down. CHEA1 is Cheapside. But the content of the element, the actual toponym, can be whatever. So that's where we got all the variants from. We said, go and find everything in the project that's tagged CHEA1 and populate this cell in the table where we want variants. So now we have a set of data that we can feed back to the people who are doing serious data mining on a scale much bigger than what we are doing. They can take all of those strings, search EvoTCP or any other corpus for them, and return a list of all the references to Cheapside without having to do natural language processing. And what type of place were they? Well, we actually use a document taxonomy in the header, in the metadata, of each file. That's how we generated that list of places that were in our placeography. It's coming directly from here. So everything that shows up when you click on church has the MoEML document type, encyclopedia, location, church. So there we had the built-in place type that we could just harvest and plop right into that final column there. And geocoordinates, because we've been trying desperately to georeference this map-like text for so long, and had made the decision to put the geocoordinates in the files rather than on the map, we could harvest them and put them in this gazetteer. We went one step further. I won't show you, but most people who are serious about data mining don't actually want to have all of your tagging. They'll come and they'll do something called scraping. They'll scrape your data and take all the tagging out of it. So we thought, we don't want our data scraped. We're going to prepare it for you in a pre-scraped form. So anybody who wants this data can download it in a JSON file and have just the data and just the very minimum tags. They don't have to try to scrape the data out of our user-friendly gazetteer. Data miners hate interfaces. So we just got rid of the interface. So what can we do with this? Well, data mining clearly is one immediate application for it. Natural language processing and named entity recognition. Anybody who works in named entity recognition starts with a gazetteer. The ESTC has been working with a project called Shakespeare at the University of Iowa to take all of the place-based data out of that omnibus metadata field. And we want to try to put date fields on it as well, and then we can actually map where all of the printers in early modern England worked, what STC numbers were associated with that particular print shop. You know, those colophons always say, you know, printed for J.B. White and are to be sold at his shop at the Spread Eagle or something. Mm-hmm. Where was that? You know, where would you be walking to go and buy that book? What else was in that bookshop at the same time? What would you pass by on your way there? Would you go, oh, you know, there's the guy selling erotic poetry. I'm going to go get my sermon over here. So what was in your physical environment as you were consuming culture? That's the kind of question we want to be able to answer. We've already run our gazetteer against the first set of data they provided us. They accidentally provided us with 18th century data. So we can't publish it on MoEML, but we're thinking maybe the Grep Street project might like it. It's all ready to plug into their maps if we can just tweak a couple fields. Then you can run those names against the EBO TCP corpus. And all of the work that we've been doing laboriously, we're searching EBO ourselves, looking for toponyms. Eventually, we'll be able to go and get them dynamically. And then we'll be able to correct our gazetteer, and the two things will be mutually correcting. We've also, the authority names are going to be really useful. Because of the spatial turn, people are trying to add spatial data to lots of pre-existing projects or build it into new projects. So all those projects have to go through the same process of deciding what to call places. A lot of them have just decided to use our authority names. The responsibility is a bit frightening, but maybe we can all work together to agree. I made the arbitrary decision that 1600 was the year. 2 years after Stow's survey was published, sort of halfway through the period of early modern drama, halfway through the period of our site, whatever name was most common in 1600 would be the authority name. But the authority names come from funny places. Parish clerks have to count up the number of people who die during plague years, and then they publish broadside sheets with the name of the parish and the number of people who died. They also count up everybody who died of other causes, so you learn about some very strange things, like the man who fell off the bridge when he tripped over a dog, along with all the people who died of the plague. But there you have a list of parish names, and I thought, well, the parish clerks should know, so I'll take their names as authority names. A database of Early English playbooks is adding spatial information to its colophons, and they're actually linking back to us, so it's a nice data loop that makes their users aware of our project and vice versa. That can be really useful for students who are just learning how to do research. They sometimes stumble across one great resource and don't connect it to the other ones. Personographies. People live in places, so early modern letters online. great project, full of addresses. Where were those addresses? Where are those people living? We're going to link in with them. Partly because Kim McLean-Fiander, who you know, is now my postdoc and was on Early Modern Letters online. So actually interoperability happens at the level of the human too. You want people to move between projects because they carry that knowledge with them and become human interoperability. Okay, so I will do my acknowledgements. I'll leave you with some links, and if you would like to stay, we can certainly have a look at the new map. So Martin Holmes, my right-hand person in so many ways. He's on the TEI Technical Council, writes the TEI documentation, and never lets me hack anything. Tell the truth, he says. Kim McLean-Fiander, she's the Associate Project Director now. She's been really instrumental in building the map. She's done a lot of the traveling and looking at the maps. She's got a better design sense than I do, so she worked with the artists, did the research. Actually did that thing that House does, in Gregory House. He draws on glass, so we actually worked on the windows in our building, and then put the map up behind it. It's very cool. We've got a terrific research team of students who are ever so smart. I train them. They always surpass me, and then their last job is to teach me what they know so that I can pass it on to the next generation. And we are a SSHRC-funded project, so thank you, Government of Canada. So I want to give you some links. There's the link to the Vertexer tool. Greg Newton is very modest about this, but I think he's done an amazing thing for any of us who work with space and need to get geocoordinates for things. Martin has built a code sharing tool. We're really interested in surfacing our TEI because encoding is a critical act. I would actually like us to be able to collate code at some point, because that's an editorial intervention that would be nice to capture. So a first step is to make code visible, and we are hoping to implement that on a number of different TEI projects so that you can come to our project and see how we're using the geotag and go to another project and see how they're using the geotag and so on. So we'll actually give you lots of different examples of how people are implementing this critical form of encoding. And finally, if you're interested, we did write some geocoding instructions, and it's got a little essay at the beginning about the challenges of doing historical GIS. Okay, thank you.
So we have about 20 minutes left for questions. If anyone would like to start off with a question for Janelle.
Yes.
This is two parts. When are you planning to have the Liberties up there?
The Liberties?
The Liberties, yeah.
Next week.
Oh, fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Second question on that. Is it possible to see what is in each Liberty? Like, how will it be organized?
There's two things we're doing. One is that we've got a links file, which it's not a public file, but we use it to connect places that we think should be connected but aren't obviously connected on the map. So if you looked at St. Paul's, for example, you would see that. Oops, that's St. Pancras Lane. I don't remember all the XML IDs off by heart. St. Paul's Cathedral, it's kind of, there it is. Came up with our mobile style sheet, so it looks quite nice on phone. Related documents, it gives you a list of all the other related documents. So we might do that with the Liberties, but you can also, I don't know if we've implemented it on this map yet. If you click on the map, I just don't want to do it right now. Maybe on our dev site. I'll tell you a little insider trick. You can always see what we're up to by adding dev to our URLs. That's where but it won't always work. That's where we allow ourselves to break stuff. We need to break things to make them better. No, it's not going to work. I haven't tried it myself, but our developer just did something last week where you can highlight a whole section of the map and it'll show you everything that's in that section of the map. And then you can decide if you're interested in it or not. But you can also just select the things you want to see. So that was one part of your question.
Well, the first part was when will it be available,
Mm-hmm.
and then the second part.
Are we having another meal together at some
We're
point?
not.
We're not. I'd be really interested in getting some feedback from you. It's been really interesting to have launched the map in beta, and we tweeted about it, and we got a ton of feedback on Twitter. People saying, I can't make this do this. And then we realized that what was completely obvious and intuitive to us wasn't obvious and intuitive to the rest of the world. So we were able to make some changes before we moved it from the development site over to the live site. But we do still consider it to be in beta. Okay. So it's useful to me to know that you would like to see everything that's in the Liberty, with the caveat that it's there because we tagged it. And if we didn't tag it, that doesn't mean it's not there.
Yeah.
And see some cool map features then?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So we built this for you, the world, I guess. So there's the map. It's available at 7 different levels of resolution. If you're going to use it in a classroom, it's a good idea to load it up in your office ahead of time and zoom in and zoom out, because what's happening behind the scenes is that your computer is caching all of those, so they'll come up super quick in the classroom. Okay, well, you seem to have really good connection here. You can turn things on and off. So if you're interested in livery company halls, you can just view those. If you're interested in particular livery company halls, you can decide which ones you want to see. We have a clear all button here somewhere. There we go. So if you want to know where Boyer's Hall is, there it is. And it's fully integrated with the encyclopedia. Well, this might be the answer to your problem. Once you get into a certain level of resolution, things will sort of show up as you zoom around, and they'll stay live for about a second. We're not committed to this color at all. That's what beta is all about. It's about making it work, and then you get somebody to make it look pretty later. But it's linked into the encyclopedia entries. Okay, so where it becomes really useful, if you want to search for something, you can. It will give you everything that we have in our placeography that has Cheapside anywhere in it. And then if you want to see it, you can click on it. So that's great. If you're teaching a text, there's what is obviously a toponym in it, and you want to see quickly where it is on the map. You can search for it here. What's more valuable, I think, is that if you're teaching a play that has numerous different references in it and you want to get a sense of the topographical scope of the text, you can mark them all on the map. So say you're teaching a chase made in Cheapside, so you would add that. And it also mentions Puddleworth. So you could put that on as well. I'm just going to make some up. I haven't read Chase made in Cheapside for a while. St. Faith Underchurch. Oops, I'm going to do that. Might not be there yet. Oh, that's not there either. Okay, I've got to go add some more. We've got about 1,200 locations, and we've removed 675 over from the old map, but we still have a few to go. So we keep having these mapathons fueled by lots of coffee and pizza. So we're not done. So what you could do actually is generate a map that has all the locations in the play marked. You want to share it with your students. You click the bookmark. And you have a URL that you can copy and paste into a course space or Moodle or Blackboard, whatever you're using, or you can send in an email. It's already proved really useful from our end because people will draw stuff on the map and they'll say, what is this? Or I think this is wrong. And then we can click on the link and see the map that they drew for us. We actually had a student tell us that we had the location of the theater off by a little bit. That was very cool. He'd done some really great research and convinced us that he was right and we had it wrong. So we changed it. Then maybe you want to draw a line. Say you want to show the route that Moll would have taken from her parents' place in Cheapside, where she's been imprisoned, down to the wharf, where she would have gotten on a boat. You can start drawing a line. She would have gone down here, and then she would have fled down Carter Lane. Oops. Gotta keep clicking. Whatever. Double click when you're done. And then it's a really ugly URL, but you can actually bookmark the map with your drawing on it. So those are the pixel points, and anybody who clicks on that link will get the map with all the locations you've selected plus your map. This is actually how we draw on the map. We decide to draw a point. This is a tree. Down at the bottom, that's the TEI that we drop straight into our TEI file. Because it's totally formulaic, so the programmer has just said, take those pixel points and put them in this set of tags. So this is what we do during our mapathons. We draw pictures on the map, we grab the coordinates, we drop them in the files, and then we do all the processing behind the scenes that we need to. Okay? Say that you want to identify a whole bunch of things. Say, I want to mark all the trees on the map. That would give you a URL or a TEI that you could drop into a TEI file about trees on the Agas map, if you wanted to. Or you could create a bookmark for that, or you want to put it in an article or drop it into a PowerPoint presentation, download it as a PNG file, and then you can use the map without having to have an internet connection during a conference. Super. And there is a set of instructions to create your own locations. So we hope that it's going to facilitate some interesting things in the classroom and make it possible for people to use this in conference papers and make points about questions to do with space and place in early modern. And also we hope write to us and say, I think that there was a brothel here, could you add it to your placeography? Okay, convince us and we'll add it. Using their coordinates, since if they send us the link, we of course get the TEI there.
So all of that is possible because you've essentially got XML IDs behind every like square millimeter of the map practically?
No, can I put this up?
With this off.
Every map, including the Agas map. The Agas map is not even central to our project anymore. It used to live in our database. Now it doesn't even live in our database. It's just a graphic user interface to a set of georeferenced data. We could swap out that map and put in any other map at any other time. But every map lives in the database as a surface. And then we describe every surface. We always start at top left. So that's 0, 0, and then this may be 3000.1676. So you can describe any point on that surface in terms of its XY coordinates. Okay, so we don't actually georeference the map at all. But in our TEI files, Cheapside, we have the geotag that says Cheapside is here, okay, latitude, longitude. And then we also have surface, this map, whatever we call that, Agas, zone, that point in pixels goes down there. So basically what we're saying in this file is this point corresponds to these latitude and longitude coordinates. When we've done enough of those, then we're going to try to georeference and georectify the map again. Because now we can turn every single one of those XY points into latitude and longitude. And it will be very interesting to load up our map in Google Earth and see just how distorted, crunched, stretched it gets. But georeferencing the map, we decided, was an exercise in futility. Because there's things like that church that's in the wrong place. And TEI allows us to say, this is where the church appears on the zone, on the surface, but this is where it should be. Because TEI allows for choice.
Right.
Because TEI is coming from textual scholarship, and we're used in textual scholarship to having different possibilities, right? Othello, she gave me for my pains a world of kisses. She gave me for my pains a world of sighs. You have a very forward Desdemona and a very decorous Desdemona, one who kisses and one who sighs. What's the editor to do? The editor says, we have a choice here. We have option A and we have option B. TEI allows you to record that. It also allows you to prioritize one over the other. So we have a choice here. We have sick. This is where it is on the Agas map, whatever it is, X and Y. And sick. Core, corrected, zone. This is where it should be on the Agas map. Okay, so when people are browsing around our map, what they want to see is the church where it's depicted on the map, probably. So we will write a set of processing instructions that will display the church on the zone that's in the sick element. But when we try to georeference the map, we're not going to pay any attention to those because that would create a huge pucker in that corner of the map. We'll take the corrected ones. This is where it should be on the Agas map. So match that corrected point on the Agas map with the geocoordinates that we assign to St. Martin Orgar in this file. Does that make sense? So this is what happens when a textual scholar edits a map. Yes, I love GIS. I've worked a lot with it, but it's a really different way of thinking. And GIS doesn't really allow for human mistakes. It doesn't allow for the messiness of humanities data, but TEI does. So if you can marry the precision of GIS with the fuzziness of textual encoding, then you can actually work with historical maps. And that's kind of the next big project for us, once we've done this, is actually building tools that will enable other people to work with historical maps like this. So people who do historical GIS aren't bound by 19th century ordnance survey maps for medieval data. Or a made-up map. They could actually take a map-like object, basically a text, and plot things on it, but still keep the utility of the GIS. Because people do like to go and stand on those spots. It's one of the things that draws people to the humanities. You can stand on the spot where Shakespeare was born. You can stand on the spot where Stow was buried. You can stand on the spot where the curtain used to be under your feet. And it's the closest we have to a sacred experience in our discipline. So GIS allows you to do that.
If there are no more questions, then let's please thank Professor Jenstad.